All right, we are back for the season one finale of Critical Listening. My name is Max Alper.
Hey everyone, I'm Liz Pelly.
Liz, we it's been a good run. 2025, the year of deep critical insight into music and its adjacent medias on the internet. And I feel like we have the perfect guest to round out the year, don't you think?
Yeah, good stuff. Episode 10, 2025 finale. We wanted to end the year and sort of like tie a bow on episode 10 with an episode that looked sort of big picture at the year in music media. So we are, yeah, very lucky to be in conversation with someone with a particularly interesting perspective on not even just like media shifts this year, but media shifts in music journalism more broadly over the past decade.
So who is it? Who is our guest? Who do we got? We didn't even mention them yet.
For episode 10, we have with us music critic and YouTuber Anthony Fantano, who I'd say hardly needs an introduction, but you may know him from his YouTube page, The Needle Drop, where he reviews records on screen. And it was, yeah, in addition to reviewing records over the past few years, Anthony has also been doing a lot of music industry critique. He's been making a lot of videos about Spotify, about streaming, about AI. And we thought it would be really interesting to, not just have a conversation amongst ourselves as critics about all of the kind of big stories in music streaming critique, music streaming discourse over this year, but maybe a conversation more focused on how public perception of streaming discourse seems to have shifted, or shifts that we're noticing in the ways that people respond to this type of criticism. So that was some of the thinking for inviting Fantano onto the show. Obviously, there's so many things that we could have talked to him about, and probably the only really hard thing about this episode is that even while we were talking, I was writing down so many other questions that I
Yeah.
would have liked to ask him, but we couldn't necessarily get to all of them.
Yeah, there's
But
a
we
whole
did get
lot.
to a lot.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
definitely got to a lot here. I mean, I've been a long time subscriber of the Fantano channel, but not the needle drop for this exact thing that we're talking about. Like this distinction of him having multiple channels, but for quite a long time, since the late 2010s, through his Fantano channel, which focuses more broadly on let's say the socio-political topics related to music. I've always found that to be a fascinating outlet for him, even just as a sort of a platform to rant, which I find quite entertaining. But he's, as listeners will soon hear, he's incredibly articulate guy who knows his stuff. And we covered quite a bit.
I was really glad that in this episode, in addition to, talking about what we wanted to talk about, the streaming discourse, actually getting into some of the comments that appear on some of his streaming critique episodes and sort of unpacking some of the common responses that he gets. But that we also talked about music criticism more broadly.
Yeah.
I was really actually intrigued that and happy that within the first like minutes of this podcast, the subject of the relationship between like doing this type of structural critique and just the role of a music critic generally came up, because I really see them as connected. I always when I talk to my students about like why I'm someone who is a music journalist who's also interested in structural industry critique, like part of what I talk about is that the role of the music critic has always been to, expand the context on music so that people can hopefully like walk away from it understanding music as more than just background in their lives, as something
Yeah.
that actually is like consequential, to grapple with, and without even necessarily like framing it that way. I do feel like that kind of came up when we asked him, like, what got you interested in doing these sorts of structural critiques? It's
Yeah.
like, that's part of what you do as a music critic. And I really
Absolutely.
appreciated that.
Yeah, I feel like, and he talks a bit about, oftentimes people will just, they use music strictly as a utility of escape, right? But I think that like you said, the role of the critic, it has to be fully vertically integrated. We can't just be rating albums. We need to be talking about the contexts that bring about some of our favorite albums, and it wouldn't be doing full journalistic due diligence to just be like this exists in a vacuum, right? And so I think it's refreshing to have someone like that with such a large platform in a medium that is heavily informed by the algorithm, as we will be discussing, or as you'll hear soon. Um, but to have the even if it's on a separate channel from the needle drop, it still gets potentially millions of views talking about these things. Like, and even if he has to Trojan horse some of these conversations, like in his more recent Spotify Wrapped video, where it's become a tradition of his to say do a couple funny things and then throw in the structural industry critique as a Trojan horse. It's a very clever way to get people thinking about this, and it's good that this is not just relegated to more academic media studies types of publications or academic critique, but to make this accessible. I do think that this type of thing is important for just the music normies, as he puts it, to be cognizant of.
Thanks again to Anthony Fantano for hanging out with us this morning. Throughout this episode, we also will be playing some short clips from the Critical Listening team's shared favorite records of 2025. So please check out the show notes for the track list and links to where you can support the artists. Happy New Year, everyone, and we will catch you in 2026.
Thank you for joining us. It's our season 1 finale of Critical Listening. And with us to close out the year, we have ourselves a serious doozy. Music critic, YouTuber, the internet's busiest music nerd, the creator of The Needle Drop, Anthony Fantano. Melon, the production team has instructed me not to talk about weightlifting with you for this interview, so I'm going to try my best, and I'll just say welcome to the show. We're absolutely thrilled to have you on.
Liz, the production team.
No, there's one more, but Liz too. Yeah.
Sorry, it was me. It was me in the notes.
If we have time,
I said
we'll get into veganism.
If there's time at the end, we can talk weightlifting, talk favorite vegan snacks or whatever. But what we really wanted to talk about today is 2025. So like Max said, yeah, thanks for joining us. We were hoping that this episode we could talk about how streaming discourse has changed this year, maybe a little bit about how the on-screen music critic sphere shifted this year, just the state of music media in general and what to make of it all. Definitely want to start with streaming though. So, to situate us a little bit, both of us know that you've been covering streaming for a while, but maybe to situate our listeners, can you talk to us a little bit about not just the streaming coverage that you've been doing this year, but like the past handful of years? What drew you to start offering commentary on the streaming landscape? And how do you approach incorporating some of these more structural industry critiques into what you're doing on your YouTube channels? I know you're someone who's like visited the picket lines of Amazon striking workers. So I'm wondering if this is firstly a labor issue for you or if there's more to it.
I don't know if I could say it's firstly, secondarily, or thirdly, but it's something I consider and think about, I think I kind of go back to 2017 because that's when I started my second YouTube channel where I focus a little bit more on like broader music industry commentary. And, I don't know, there's some people that don't really like this or sort of voice distaste about this in my reviews occasionally, but I am the type of person who does like to look at a lot of the music and art that I consume and kind of the broader cultural lens that it exists in. And sometimes this means like bringing up political issues people don't always have clear agreements on all the time and so on and so forth. And, with that, it's kind of difficult to not talk about the economics of music. I mean, if I started the needle drop through some other format 20 plus years ago, I'd probably be talking about CD sales or whatever, because I mean, I
Right.
pretty vividly remember back then, you know, there being articles and coverage about how little money your average artist was making off the sale of a CD, you know.
Mhm.
But you know, with that being said, I'd probably also be talking about how terrible the radio market was back then too, with all the conglomeration. But again, I'm digressing. Streaming has become the main way through which most people are finding out about their, you know, new favorite artists, are listening to their old favorites. Why not talk about it? You know, it makes the most sense to talk about it. And you know, the thing is, every year it seems to be kind of like increasing its impact on the quality of the music that we're hearing, the way the music that we're listening to sounds, and the way that it's even structured. I mean, you know, it's kind of impossible to ignore, especially in like, you know, hip hop circles. What a lot of people talk about is kind of like, you know, the death of the third verse, because there's just this
Mm.
broad incentive due to the way that, you know, monetizing on streaming works, to make your songs as like, you know, within reason as short as possible, so that, you know, you're kind of like hitting that, you know, revenue threshold, you know, the first 30 seconds or whatever the song gets played. But then you kind of increase that likelihood that the song is going to get played again by reducing the amount of time that it lasts overall. So people are kind of like going back to spin it one more time. You know, the way through which music is delivered to us impacts pretty much every element of it, just as much as, you know, the emotions that the artist is putting into the song itself. So, I mean, it should be a discussion. It should be a topic.
Mhm. It's interesting you said that you feel like some of your listeners, viewers, is that what you refer to them?
You can
Viewers?
call it listeners, viewers,
Okay. Um,
stands, haters. You
Haters. I was
know,
gonna say haters for sure.
people who engage with what I do come in all types.
For
So,
sure.
mhm. Well, what you said about them not, some of them not enjoying more political perspective being brought to the work. That's so interesting because I feel like that's such a big part of what criticism is trying to like situate something in its context or different types of contexts. Like, I would be curious, like that type of consumer of this type of music media, like, what do you think that they're looking for,
I
if not
think a lot of people just use music as an escape, and that's it, you
mm,
know. And when they're listening to music, and as you've, you know, even covered in your recent fantastic book that I'm sure everyone listening to this show has heard about before,
mm,
you know, there's a lot of people kind of hopping onto streaming services and just kind of, you know, looking up their new favorite songs from their favorite artists, or looking up a playlist, who are just like looking for a way to unplug and not think about kind of like, you know, their life, the way the world works, anything like that. They're just looking for some kind of like distraction, and don't want to be confronted with, you know, sort of like maybe what exactly Sabrina Carpenter's new single is saying about gender politics, you know, and like, you know, heterosexual relationships, and so on and so forth. But, you know, if you're a critic, it's worth talking about, you know, because I mean, it's part of what separates her from a lot of other people in her field, you know, the sort of like, you know, roles that she tends to put herself in, and the men that she sees herself opposite to in these stories about various relationships. So, you know, and that's just one example. It's kind of an important piece of the pie if you're going to explain the appeal of a record, or explain why it works for you or why it doesn't, or what makes it special among everything else that's out there today. That's the point of criticism, to give context to what you're talking about. And you know, I think there are some people who, unfortunately, again, just only see music as a means of escape, or kind of like unplugging or turning off or ignoring things, or, you know, just merely kind of approach a review looking to maybe just hear somebody shit on something they've already kind of predetermined they don't like, or have their opinions
Mm.
validated. And, you know, while I don't begrudge anybody the desire to do that, or those intentions necessarily, I mean, I'm not going to feed into that knowingly. You know, I mean, you may tune into a review that I do, and we may align. I may hate this thing you hate. I may like this thing that you like, and that's fine. But I'm not going to say that I like it just because I know that's going to make, someone happy. I'm going to say it because I genuinely feel that way. And,
Right.
I figure even though sometimes the social issues and politics behind a certain song, or maybe, things even outside of music, might be kind of disagreeable to people, or might be surprising that a music reviewer would have strong opinions on it. I mean, I spent years studying and, nerding out over political science. I still do to this day. It's something that's always kind of informed my worldview, even before I've spent more time formally studying that than I have actual music, and, institutionally speaking, like in college, in school. A lot of what I know about music, I've learned through just kind of personal passion and pursuit. So again, that piece of the puzzle is kind of like difficult to ignore for me, and it's I don't know, I know it's something that some people avoid just for sake of like saving themselves a headache, or maybe there's like, some brand consciousness there or whatever. But the way that I see it, like I'm already kind of pissing off people with my music opinions all the time. I figure, what's one more thing for people to be mad about?
Before we move on to more stuff about streaming, I was just wondering, like, could we dig into that a little bit more? What could you elaborate on, the maybe something that influenced your interest in politics?
Without getting too into the weeds about it, I mean, I think just like the Iraq War and Bush administration radicalized me. Like that's, without explaining why or how or anything like that. I mean, I think, even people with like a surface level knowledge of politics know how bad the Iraq War was, and just America's actions post 9/11 and so on and so forth. I mean, again, the very kind of plain history is there. And, that very much got me interested in just how broken the system was and continues to be. And I feel like it's something that needs to continue to be addressed until it gets better.
I mean, I'm curious how much of this, because you're saying, the average music listener is going in to tune out, to escape and things like that. But I would argue that someone who's in your comments section is far more active. At least, there's plenty of viewers, but the people, even the haters that are, there to scrap and disagree and things like that, that shows to me a level of commitment towards the art form, even in a contrarian, even just in a addicted to cortisol, need to troll in the comments sort of feeling. I mean, that to me describes some sort of a little more niche subculture that goes beyond your average just put something on algorithmic daily like wake up playlist. No.
Mm-hmm. No, it does. And, not to sort of like paint everyone who engages with what I do, or, sort of see something in it with a broad brush in terms of kind of like the confrontation or what you're kind of, saying in the comments. In my experience, a lot of what you see in the comments, a lot of whatever negativity that I see online is again, very kind of penned into the internet world. And it's usually just like a very vocal minority of
Right.
people that just in that
Right.
moment happen to have a strong opinion and just feel like the need to get it out, you
Yeah.
know? There are, across all of my platforms, there's millions of people seeing my face every month. And, it's brought things to a point where I'm pretty recognizable in public now, like even in places and spaces where, I mean, even early on, people were recognizing me, but it was really only sort of like in certain contexts where I could like pretty much predict it was going to happen, like at a show, you know?
Right.
These days on a regular basis, it's at the grocery store,
Yeah.
like places where you would never think it would normally happen. The interactions are always nice, it's always nice. It's always fun. And even to the degree that it does get a little contentious, people are kind of funny about it. There
Yeah.
was even this one guy who was driving this fiberglass company truck. It was just like one of those work trucks with like a phone number on the side. And me and a friend of mine were about to like go in this storefront on, this main street. And, he just started like yelling my name from the truck, and he was like, "Hey!" And once he finally caught my attention, he's like, "Hey, you underrated the sleep token, Fantano. You underrated the sleep token." Go easier on Sleep
The
Token, you
sleep
know? So it's like
token.
there's all kinds of people running across what I do, you know, and people with all sorts of, you know, passionate opinions on all sorts of
Hey
music.
man. Hey man, sleep token, music of the working man.
Hey, coworker music, bro. Coworker
Coworker.
music.
Oh
And you
man.
know, I had my coworker music phase when I was younger. I was listening to Corn and Limp Bizkit, you know.
No, that's not
These
coworker
the
music.
Yeah, you know, these days it's that Kill Carl guy on Instagram who,
Right.
you know, is rapping about being a metalhead bitch, and then, you know, then the gent riffs come in and all that.
Whatever. What's that? Yeah, I don't even know, man. I only just discovered this term coworker music. The various
What is
I'm
it?
it's just like it's like human made slop. It's music meant made for social media, made for YouTube, made for virality's sake that sacrifices much of the musicality, even intentional cringe. What's that guy Jax, that rapper or something like that, right? Or
Oh, okay, okay. Listen, like
all right.
that's kind of that's and you're true. I mean, well, you're correct. That is true, but that's kind of like the music nerd explanation of it. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
real explanation is you work a minimum wage job at a restaurant, and you know you're friends with several people at the restaurant, and there's like one dude with like a few weird tattoos that you know at the restaurant, and you know maybe one of them's like a neck tattoo or whatever, and he just literally comes up and he's like, yo, I just heard the sickest shit, you know, and it's like, you got to hear this song, and it's like the thing that he pulls up on his phone, it is that song.
Yes.
Like, you know, just
Couldn't have
like
said it better myself.
basically like line cook that dude. And look, I've worked in restaurants before. It's like line cook
Yo.
dude, few weird tattoos. He comes up to you, and you know it's just basically like you just said, like the country Dak song where he's like, "Man, have it hard, and it's hard to be a man," and you know just that, you know, it's just that's the vibe.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah,
Suno was built for this. Oh man.
yeah.
All right. We'll get back to streaming a little bit here. We have to do an entire separate episode on the meme music. Um
Thanks for educating me.
yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fantastic. So as you know, Anthony, we're coming on about 1 year since the release of Liz's book Mood Machine. And if you were to ask someone like me who mostly interacts with music practitioners, like you said, the music nerds response, if you were to ask someone who's actively involved in a scene in one way or another, I would say that this book has shifted the zeitgeist tremendously when it comes to just normalizing the talking point that Spotify is a shitty platform for both musicians and listeners, right?
Mhm.
But what I think makes your position so unique is that your platform on the internet goes far beyond the heads, as we might call it, um, and is inclusive, like you said, of even some of the more casual listeners who might just want to tune in for some rap industry gossip, or some controversial takes and whatnot. So I have to ask, like, have you noticed a shift in more mainstream music conversations in the last year when it comes to Spotify and streaming as a whole, specifically in the last year?
Yeah, you know, I think like it's gotten so bad and it's gotten so obnoxious and annoying that you know, here's the thing. I've been complaining about Spotify for years, and I think, you know, when I was originally starting to do more content around it, while I did feel strongly about what I was saying, I knew that like some of the issues that I was kind of critiquing and nitpicking around, like it's not the sort of stuff that your average casual listener and consumer would care all that much about, because I feel like your average casual listener and consumer of anything doesn't really get up in arms about a certain topic until things change in such a way to where it affects them personally.
Mm.
I mean, you know, that extends to politics, that extends to a lot of different things. It's unfortunate that, you know, that things work that way, but you know, honestly, I feel like most people only have so much bandwidth. And, you know, while obviously I care so much about music and the music industry that like I'm so consumed by the nuance of everything that, you know, maybe I'm kind of like calling out certain issues that I could possibly see snowballing into something bigger down the road. that in a lot of ways also comes at the sacrifice of maybe some other stuff that I am consuming or enjoying more casually and not really paying attention to the nitty gritty of every single day. You know, I
For
can't
sure.
be, and nobody can be like utterly obsessed with every single facet of their life 24/7. You know, nobody has the mind for it. So, I think that's where, people like me or us just kind of come in. And, while I have seen a lot of pushback over some of the stuff I've been bringing up for a while, like, I don't know, Spotify platforming all the disinformation that was going on with the Joe Rogan show over the course of
Right,
COVID
right.
and that sort of thing. To your average listener, they're going to see that and think, well, that kind of sucks, but also like, I don't have to listen to Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? While obviously Joe Rogan's disinformation does impact them, there's almost like too many degrees abstractly of separation in their own mind to think like, oh, well, this actually does hurt me or hurt society, the society that I exist in. Either that or the means of fixing it seems like too far out, too many steps for it to be conceptualized,
Mm.
in a quick and efficient way. Now, a lot of the issues that I'm bringing up and pointing out, be it either, playlist quality going into the toilet, the price of Spotify rising, the fact that artists are being squeezed more and more, the fact that you had, artists songs being shut out of monetization if they didn't reach a certain number of streams within a certain point of time. I mean, the list goes on. Now the problems and issues have gotten so big and so huge that, even, I don't know if you want to call them like a music normie, can't ignore them. They're just like so glaring. And I think, yeah, sure, like Liz's book, my coverage, all that has, most definitely something to do with it in terms of the conversation changing. But I think, I do also attribute it greatly to just things broadly getting worse.
Yeah.
I think, things need to get worse until it basically becomes so unignorable that everybody is like aware of it and conscious of it. I don't know what like the fix necessarily is. I mean, I think, government regulation would be one, or obviously like a really strong musicians union where they could sort of like collectively bargain and strong arm, some kind of like negotiations from the streaming, from not just Spotify but all the streaming platforms,
Sure.
and come together with some kind of like baseline expectations as far as like payment and exposure and so on and so forth. There's a lot of directions it could go in, but again, I attribute it also to things getting so obviously bad that people can't really ignore it anymore. And now when I am kind of discussing these issues and bringing them up, I don't really get a whole lot of pushback. It's really a lot of people who are just like kind of continually disgusted with how much more awful things are getting.
Hmm. And maybe as just some proof of that, I waded into your comments last night. Did you ever look at them?
Oh yeah, no, of course I do. Was it which
Crazy.
was it just any random video or a particular video?
Well, I looked at the first video that you ever made about Spotify on your Fantano channel, and I was looking at the comments, and like not like a ton of pushback, but
Just
still things
sorry,
like,
sorry to interrupt, but just as a reminder and also context for everybody else, because I don't remember honestly, what was the first video that I did on Spotify? Like, what was the angle?
you were talking about like an article that had been in Vulture, I think, about Spotify. It was called like Spotify playlists or a cesspool or something, or
Oh, okay,
Spotify
okay,
creations a
okay.
cesspool, I think
It's
it was
like kind of
called.
coming back, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just about like playlist spam, basically,
Mm,
like people spamming playlists with um spammy songs, kind of like pre slop kind of. But I
yeah,
think it was like 8 years ago. But the comments, I wrote some of them down. Oh man, I love Spotify. Guess I have to change my opinion. Spotify Premium is a blessing to the universe. Spotify is better than Title. There were like some of these in the top
yeah.
comments. And then I looked at the video you made a couple weeks ago where you kind of like were responding to people's Spotify Wrapped, but then using it as a way to sort of kind of like Trojan horse in these articles
Yeah,
about.
Very,
that's become
very
like a year.
clever.
That's become like a yearly thing on the channel. Like it's
Yes.
basically our anniversary Spotify post.
I love it. I love it. That's
Like
so good. The
I
Trojan horse. Yeah.
yeah, I do genuinely, give some funny comments on people's raps, but then, I'll just randomly throw in articles and information about just everything basically Spotify has done over the last year that's disappointing in some fashion.
Love that.
I mean, also the top comment on that one was someone being like, "I forgot to send you my Wrapped. Can you make another video about it?"
I saw that.
But
I saw that.
besides that, they were like, top song was cancel your Spotify subscription. 2026 year of CDs. Absolutely, the least Spotify could do is label AI tracks, and then someone saying, "I really appreciate you taking a strong stance against ICE and related bullshit." So like the even looking at some of the top comments on those two videos, clearly something had shifted between those 8 years. Where like on this most recent video, the comments were like very celebratory of the streaming critique.
Mm.
So yeah, I guess like we kind of got into this, but when you look at things that people write on your videos about Spotify, about streaming, like are there any other more common types of comments and replies these days? Like, are there any kind of like pushback responses you feel like you've gotten accustomed to?
A lot of the responses that I get these days, and I've made a few other pieces of content to address this, though it's sort of very difficult. I feel like in order to really kind of like drill down into this, I have to be making pieces of content like this all the time. But I what I'm kind of prefacing here is I just get a lot of people replying saying like, but what am I supposed to use instead? You know, it's like, what streaming platform should I use instead? What should I do instead? What should I do instead? What's a more preferable streaming platform? And, you know, you would think like, I mean, honestly, while a little bit more research than this goes into videos that I've done on this topic, like, you know, some of the basic information in terms of like what platforms pay the most, what certain platforms cost, so on and so forth, the sound quality, which I mean, I imagine these are probably factors people care about the most. You know, all of this is very easily Googleable. You know, all this
It's
information
true.
turns up real fast. As far as like, you know, stuff about which platforms take certain stances on AI and that sort of thing, like you might need to watch one of my videos or like look up an article to get some of those deeper facts. But like the basic stuff as far as like cost, payments, all that, like that comes up pretty fast if you just look it up. And, you know, honestly, while I have and I will continue to do, you know, videos on this topic in order to continue, you know, just like informing people, um, this information is also always changing. So, I mean, you know, some video about, you know, how much a certain platform is paying that I made last year may not even be relevant now, you
Right.
know? So, you know, this is stuff that's always been getting updated with new videos that I do. And, you know, there are some people who also, and this is another kind of prevailing comment sometimes, there are some people who do respond to some of our coverage on this front, some of our AI coverage saying like, why are you still talking about this? This is like, you've talked about this like 4 or 5 times, whatever. And, you know, unfortunately, I feel like with the way the internet works now and how everything that's getting put in front of people's faces and is recommended is so algorithm heavy as opposed to like, you know, the way it used to be originally when you
Yeah.
subscribed to something and there was less content saturation at that point in time in, you know, the early 2010s, and whatever was shown to you was just chronological according to when it actually like was released onto the internet, with maybe some feature, you know, recommendations here and there, especially on, you know, on the YouTube side, like on the sidebar. But you know, outside of that, like exposure came a little more easily and sensibly when it came to whatever new content you came out with. These days, what's getting shown to you has kind of already been predetermined to be relevant to you based upon what you watched previously, you know? So, I mean, chances are high that if you watched my last Spotify video and you even commented on it, you're probably going to see my next Spotify video because it's going to be shown to you. Unfortunately, there are a lot
Right.
of people who need to know this information, but they're not seeing any of my Spotify videos. This most recent Wrapped you know, video that I did, from what I saw on a few different platforms, got some more exposure than my previous ones did because the fact that the Wrapped is obviously like a big conversation every year between a lot of you know, music fans. It's kind of put Spotify itself in the algorithms and, you know, sort of like topical searches for a lot more internet users than, you know, is usually the case. And I was getting a lot of DMs and responses from people just saying like, I didn't even know all this stuff that you were just saying.
Yeah.
And again, because of the way algorithms work now, like none of us are having a collective informational experience around any topic, you know, no matter how broad, no matter how niche. So, even something as big as Spotify, which, millions of people are interacting with every day as far as like their main window to the world of music, are logging on without knowing even a fraction of the types of information that either I'm putting out on my YouTube channel every month or is in Liz's book. So I mean, all we can really do is just try to break down everything that we're saying and repeat it as often as possible, even sometimes at the annoyance of others who might be plugged into this stuff already. Because, look, if the internet worked the way that honestly it should, like, these videos would be reaching people that don't know this stuff, and I wouldn't need to repeat myself, and I'd be able to move on to another topic. Either that, or these problems would be writing themselves, and I wouldn't need to further comment on the fact that Daniel Ek not only invested millions of dollars into military AI, but now he's the fucking chairman of the company that he invested in, which is like
executive chairman.
Right, exactly. Which, I mean, is kind of something that you have to talk about if you talked about the previous thing, because I mean, and maybe this is a bit of a misunderstanding of what I do based on the fact that I exist on a certain platform, that when people see a video from me as opposed to, I don't know, Jake Paul, they sort of like read both of us as influencers, regardless of what we're doing. Whereas, like, while I know that I'm maybe in the eyes of many like more of an entertainer than I am kind of like a formal journalist, like I am doing, at least on some level, a journalistic practice in terms of like, these are stories and topics that I'm interested in, and I'm going to continue to talk about them as this story develops, even if I did a video about this topic a month ago. If new information arises that's relevant to share with you, I'm going to talk about it again.
What's your research process like when you do these videos?
I guess it depends on what I, have access to. I mean, I am sort of like many on the internet who are commenting on this stuff. I am basing a lot of what I do off of the work of actual sort of like, writers and journalists who are, putting up articles for certain outlets and stuff like that. But if I can get like a direct quote or some information, which I have on numerous occasions from like artists, just to kind of like hear directly from their own experience in terms of like, I can't remember what video I did this for. Again, I've done multiple Spotify videos at this point, but I remember sort of like sitting in on some kind of like a Spotify journalist town hall or something. It was like a year or so ago, and they were like telling these success stories of like independent artists who were making tons of money, and they got to like, 5 or like, even 10 million monthly listeners. They were talking about people like, Russ and Suicide Boys and so on and so forth. And that sort of made me start going into, just all the different artists I've covered over the years, and looking at their Spotify numbers and seeing that there is like very weirdly, and it's a pattern I can't really explain, but there's almost like a bit of a breaking point or like a ceiling that's very difficult to break past if you're an independent artist, or even an independent artist on a label. Like a lot of independent artists on labels are just completely by themselves, like top off and maybe at like 2 million tops, and it's very difficult to even break out into the 5 million monthly listener mark. And I was approaching some of those, some artists whose, monthly listeners are around that, and kind of asking like, what are you making per month? Because Spotify is saying this artist who's at this level is pulling in this amount of money. This artist who has 5 million monthly listeners, they just pulled in $1 million last year. So I was like, hitting up a few artists who I know were a little bit lower than that or close. And I was like, are you making anywhere near $1 million a year from Spotify streams alone? Can you explain this? And, every single time I was met with just laughter, just be like, no, I'm nowhere near that. So I was like, okay, so I mean, I am in a position now after years of doing what I do, thankfully, where there are, a lot of artists who follow my reviews and follow my, just more straight up music opinion content. And that does, thankfully give me the ability to reach out to some of these people after the fact and just kind of say like, I'm hearing this about streaming, I'm hearing this about labels, I'm hearing this about this. Can you verify this for me? Like, what's been your experience, essentially? Even if that doesn't necessarily go into a direct quote in the video or anything like that, like I can at least like reach out to some of the artists who can tell me their first person experience of the music industry itself, and basically verify whatever a label or a PR might be saying about a given trend or something like that.
Running back, we lost running back, we're searching for running.
I'd love to dive into just the medium of internet journalism specifically, and video journalism on YouTube. So you started the Needle Drop in 2009, right, as an offshoot of your column for Connecticut Public Radio. Am I correct?
Yeah, it was a podcast that started out on Connecticut Public Radio, and I was also
Okay,
writing for
podcast. Yeah.
a few weeklies here and there, and NPR's Song of the Day column as well, a little bit. Like I was just writing in a few places and doing some weekend announcing at the radio station and doing this kind of weekly music show. And also, the Needle Drop was a blog at this point as well that I was kind of regularly updating.
Gotcha. And I would assume, in 2009, the front camera facing video essay format of music journalism was a lot less common, and on the internet at large, and specifically YouTube. But as we fast forward now to 2025, we can see the spiritual children that you have spawned all over YouTube. This format of video journalism, not just on YouTube, but across several social media platforms that have made this pivot to video. It must feel strange knowing this impact that you've had on an entire segment of music media at this point. So where have you seen on-screen criticism improve during this time online versus where are you starting to see it struggle or decline in different senses?
It's difficult to say because I feel like any impact that I've had is like such a far off echo at this point that it's difficult to gauge whatever direct influence I've had, on it. The first generation and second generation of kind of like, YouTubers to come up underneath me, it was a little more obvious because the vast majority of them were all just doing straight up album reviews and would often just like have the album positioned in the same exact spot I would.
Right.
In whatever pieces of content they were making. And there's that. These days, occasionally I do get comments or messages from people who are covering or talking about music in some fashion, but it's taken a completely different format. And even though they'll message me and profess to me like, "Oh man, you're like my biggest influence," and da 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 da. But maybe it's like just some random TikToker who covers dubstep or something. You know what I mean? So I mean, the influence is most definitely there, but it's not super apparent on the surface. And I know for a fact, like, there are a lot of very sizable music reviewers that have come up underneath me over the years, and the likelihood that they're also influencing people to go off and do their thing is super high. So I mean, it is kind of difficult to kind of see where exactly the influence is clearly these days because it's so distant, given that I started in 2009. And often I feel like the format hasn't changed super radically over that course of time. But sometimes, I am a little taken aback by how, clearly some new stuff that's come up has been inspired by what I do, even if it's in less obvious ways. There's an electronic music producer who messaged me out of the blue the other day. Just not that we exchanged super regularly. It was just like completely random, and he just sent me this video of several different music writers for an outlet just talking about their favorite album of the year or whatever. And he's like, "You got to watch this. I swear to Christ, the first person talks exactly like you." And I was like, and the first person, I thought it was funny. It's like this person didn't give a vibe like me at all. But then I started hearing them talking. I was like, oh my God, that's like literally my vocal pattern, the way I would phrase things. And I mean, it's just the nature of, the experience of consuming certain things or gaining a perspective from certain people or experiences. I learned a lot of the way that I talk about and phrase things from being, at an NPR station for years. It's like maybe evolved to be a little bit more animated as I've kind of progressed. But I mean, if you look at a lot of my older videos, like a lot of the way that I talk, at least maybe it's more conscious to me because like I know the shows that I used to listen to and the hosts that I used to sort of like the most. But like when I see a lot of my older content, I'm like, God damn, I just feel like I'm doing NPR voice or whatever.
No.
And that was my point of influence for like, media and content creation, NPR and like, just like a lot of radio in general, because I originally kind of thought I was going to pursue a career in radio before I hopped on YouTube. Now I'm kind of like inadvertently giving people maybe a slight, variation of NPR voice because then they're going and copying what I'm doing. I don't know.
Minutes ago you were talking about journalistic malpractice in the mainstream music media, and it actually I was curious if you were going to bring up the subject that I wanted to ask you about in this next question, which is that anecdotally I personally feel like a big conversation that I was having with a lot of music critics this year, specifically in 2025, involved this pressure that a lot of music journalists now are feeling to embrace making videos. Like everyone is expected to be on camera right now. Even some like bigger outlets like the New York Times seem to appear to be kind of like pushing out traditional critics who only write in favor of those who can do video and audio and newsletters and things. To this I always say I don't think that anyone gets into writing because they want to be on camera. Maybe public radio though, like that makes sense.
Right.
But something else I talked to people a lot this year about, anecdotally, a big conversation I was having with critics involved issues emerging around short form video criticism, specifically regarding unlabeled pay to play, or record labels directly paying like music critic influencers to interview artists without it being disclosed. Using phrases like paid editorial rather than calling it what it is, like unlabeled sponsored content. From my perspective and the perspective of many of my peers, it's just basic journalistic ethics to not accept money in exchange for coverage, or to at least then like label it as advertisement or advertorial or something. So I was wondering, like, I don't know how you approach like situations where you have been offered money in exchange for reviews. Like, do you accept deals like these? Do you have clear boundaries about how you label things? What does media integrity look like for the on-screen music critic?
I mean, at least for me personally, I've gotten a lot of offers just to kind of like, react to certain things, talk about certain things, review them, even stuff that I was already planning on reviewing beforehand. So it just kind of like, and artists that I've even reviewed historically, which kind of like has me wondering when I get these offers, are these people even aware of like how I've talked about this artist in the past? Right. You would think that they'd be able to guess like, well, this guy's reviewed this artist's past 3 albums. They'll probably review them again. Which kind of leads me to believe like maybe they're kind of reaching out and offering this as a means of being like, maybe we'll get a positive review, you know what I mean? By virtue of doing this. Obviously there are a lot of offers that I get on that front with obscure artists too, because they're trying to like create some seemingly grassroots organic interest in them. Like, oh, Anthony Fantano's talking about them. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're worth, checking out. But yeah, I turn it down if I'm going to talk about something, given that I only have so much time to, recommend things and dive into things. I want it to be something that I'm choosing to because I'm interested in talking about it, whether I like it or not. Yeah, like from what I've seen of other people who are making that type of content, often, when they tell me, behind the scenes, or when it's like, they've somehow displayed it prominently on their page, seemingly that stuff always comes out positive. I haven't seen anybody sort of like get paid yet to shit on an album, shit on a song or whatever. At this point, maybe it's happening. Maybe someone can correct me in the comments, but let me know. The closest I've done to doing anything on the front of what you just explained, and I did a video about this recently, is I got tagged by UMG to write the liner notes for the new Velvet Underground reissue, for their vinyl file, Nico and the self-titled record reissue, and which I was happy to do. It's a record that I've reviewed before and praised before. I think it's like, a job pretty much any music writer in their right mind would take. And I have all the emails and all the documentation just sort of like, showing why it happened and showing the interaction. So, I mean, if anything needed to be kind of shown beyond that in terms of like any greater connections to UMG, I have that. But yeah, like those offers are being made. I turn them down. And sometimes I find it, strange just how, the expectations that these labels or these PR people come to the table with, or the difficulty with which they sort of or just how unnecessarily difficult they make these interactions as a means of like just faking organic interest. I guess what I'm saying is like there was a legacy artist I got approached about once doing a video about them like on TikTok, and it would have been a paid thing. And it's an artist whose music I do genuinely enjoy. They had some kind of like, I guess like reissue or something coming out. And they were like, hey, would you maybe do a list of your favorite songs from this artist and da 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 as a means of driving more attention to them during this time when they're trying to like, get the word out about this reissue. And I said like, sure, that's, something that would be cool with me. Would I be able to pick like maybe some of my favorite deep cuts? Because this artist has a lot of hits. Maybe I could talk about some of the songs that I feel like aren't maybe talked about as much in their catalog. And they said, yeah, sure. And like when we finally were getting to the point where we're coming like close to an agreement on the whole thing, as far as like, what the video was going to be and the payment and everything, my last question was like, what do you want me to put in the description as far as like, do you want me to do hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored, da 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 da? And they're like, oh, we don't want you to do that at all. And I'm like, this is a sponsored post. Like I should tell people it's sponsored, and they were like, no, absolutely not. We don't want you to do that. And, we don't want people. And it's like, okay, well, it's going to be a no from me because I mean, it's like, it's literally just 3 characters, hashtag AD, like just put that in the description. But that was enough of a turnoff for them.
Wow.
To where they were just like, no, we can't do this. Another example I guess I could cite that was very promotional, but I was also fine with because I was able to divulge this information. And it's not in my usual wheelhouse, was a time that I did a crossover for that Robbie Williams movie Better Man biopic, which was genuinely insane. Like I actually didn't think the movie was going to be as interesting as it was when I actually watched it, with the whole like weird ass monkey concept and everything. And it was kind of a, again, an intriguing watch as an American who didn't really grow up on much Robbie Williams outside of like, a Millennium or whatever, because obviously he doesn't really have like the cultural capital over here that he did over there. And I kind of talked about the movie and the soundtrack and like an Instagram video, and, and just my general experience seeing the movie, which, was mostly very positive. And, it was able to be made very clear that this is an integration. This is a crossover. This is, just for the sake of kind of spreading the word about this movie. And, I guess I didn't have any qualms about it, again, because I'm not usually professionally a movie reviewer. And I was able to make it very clear that like, the intention of this video, and as far as what I said in the video, they were my genuine thoughts. There's always, I think, like a gray area and a case by case basis, with a lot of things and a lot of issues, even around stuff that's like, not monetarily based. I know there are some people who, even without any sort of like monetary exchange going on, I wouldn't say get into music journalism with this intention, but, use their status in the community to sort of like become friends with their favorite artists, you know what I
Right.
mean? And that's sort of like a bias that comes without even anybody being paid in any direction, you know? And while you know, I'm as guilty of the next guy of you know, thinking like some of my favorite artists that have made my favorite music over the years are really cool, and you know, I just think they're so dope and so neat and so fucking sick. But you know, I can't like use my permission or use my position, even though I may have the access if I pushed hard enough to sort of like start emailing them and become their bestie and so on and so forth. Like that would just kind of cross a line and make things difficult as far as being able to cover that person objectively. And sometimes I can kind of tell, you know, when somebody's covering a certain artist or talking about a certain album, like, are they coming at this from a place of like, they truly genuinely like the music and they're analyzing it, or do they just have a weird parasocial thing going on with this particular artist? It can be um, tempting sometimes, I think, for some people to like not take it that far because, you know, their job allows them to. And look, I mean, in certain contexts, the music industry is really fun and it's a really cool place to be. And it's a really neat place to be. It's a really neat job to have. It's why there's so much competition for people to come and work in the music industry. But, you know, you've still got to take your job seriously and also sort of like consider the responsibility that comes with what you do.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's especially true for people who work in the media, like especially right now as jobs within, traditional media or working for news outlets or places that might have like more traditional kind of like ethics guidelines or, fewer and further between, and more people get their information from people who make videos and do audio, like just having a basic sense of like the importance of media integrity, like not taking money for something and not disclosing it, or like, I don't know. I feel like it's important to make it an active conversation, so that it just doesn't become normalized for people doing short form video to just like take money from labels to interview bands and not tell people that it's been paid for. It's just like doesn't help anyone from my perspective. So that was super interesting to hear your story about like a label, you know, reaching out to you to do that best of list, and then like it falling apart when they wouldn't let you put hashtag ad, because it's like, it literally is like, there's a huge precedent for this. Like,
Yeah, there's a huge precedent for this. Like all of my thoughts in the video would have been completely genuine. Also, you know, with the status of this artist's current career and them being a legacy artist, they don't drop new music anymore. You know, so it's like it's not even like this would have led to a conflict of interest down the road where I would have had to review something new and then sort of like had to sort of, you know, reckon with the fact that I took money to sort of talk about this artist prior. You know, like this would have been so clean and so easy, but like they just didn't want me to put hashtag ad in the description, which to me was crazy and makes me again sort of think like when I'm seeing other people who are kind of, you know, in positions where they do actually have a sizable following on TikTok and they're talking about music on a regular basis. Like, you know, are they saying yes to these opportunities? Are they also sort of like foregoing, you know, writing ad in their, you know, descriptions of these videos as well? It's concerning.
Ethics, man. Well, I'd love to talk about just the importance of criticism on that subject specifically. I've had I'm a music teacher and I've had a lot of younger students in the past cite you as a gateway
I'm sorry.
into
I apologize.
it's a weird it's a, so no man, no, it's a
my
good
students
thing. No.
too.
Seriously, no, it's a
Yeah.
good thing. You're a weirdo. And I think we are spiritually aligned in some of these left field things, and a lot of them have cited you as a gateway into much stranger, weirder circles, even just on the hip hop and experimental pop side of your coverage. I'm not talking about the caretaker here. I mean, I think like you know, your onboarding of people into noise via death grips and clipping and things like that, I think is a wonderful on ramp. So how important do you feel it is now in 2025? We're in the post poptimism into the sloptimism era here. How important do you feel in 2025 for the is it for the critic to promote this work out of left field as a sort of challenge to their audience? Do you feel like you gotta ease them in with a sort of low key gateway, or would you prefer to just be like, no, here's a 6 disc album about dementia that I am going to weep through, you know? I mean, and I was right there with you, but I mean, like, it's an interesting line that you toe here.
Geez, it's a hard question to answer, especially again with how content is being delivered to people now. While obviously we have some sort of consciousness and awareness of how algorithms work, how anything is coming in front of anybody at this point is so case by case and difficult to know, unless like you're literally picking up someone else's phone and like looking at what their algorithm is showing them.
Mm.
I've had friends of mine who are jealous of the fact that when I go on Instagram Reels, like 90% of the time it's showing me bad music, and they're like, that's not what it shows me at all. I want to see all this bad, terrible music that's sick. But anyway, again, difficult question to answer because like, I could be reviewing, let's say, the new 9-disc Caretaker album, and maybe there won't really be any sort of like, risk or reputation loss there and raving about it because the way the algorithm works, it'll only show that video to people who care about Caretaker.
Right, right.
I feel like, unfortunately, that's kind of the downside of the way that things are working now. I've talked about this repeatedly in recent years, and it doesn't seem to sort of be changing for the better at all. But like when my channel was smaller, there was maybe a little bit more of an even split between when I would review maybe one of the more mainstream records of that year, and then maybe when I would sort of like do a positive yellow flannel review of like a new Deerhoof album, And these days, whenever I'm reviewing an artist who is maybe on that level of popularity or lower, the views go in the toilet. And it's because like the ways by which YouTube is judging whether or not it's going to show other people this content based upon whether or not they've been able to derive enough information to know if these people already like Deerhoof, if they're going to comment on the video, which there's a lot of people who just like kind of passively vibe to what I do. It's as much as there is a lot of argument in the comments, especially if it's a very positive, glowing review, where people are maybe more likely to just kind of like, even if they disagree, just kind of be like, well, he likes that. Maybe it's not for him, or maybe it's for him and it's not for me, whatever. They're less likely to be arguing in the comments over a positive review. So because it's less polarizing, people are going to show that, people are going to be shown that, it'll be less likely that gets shown, because it's not going to be pissing people off. So as a result, when I'm doing very positive, very glowing reviews of more obscure stuff, it gets spread around a lot less. Meanwhile, if I do a new Taylor Swift review, that thing hits 1 million views faster than I've ever had a video hit 1 million views,
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm happy for the exposure. It means that I get to do what I do for a job, but it's sort of like, memory holes, anything left field, anything alternative, anything that is, a little bit more off the beaten path, unless it somehow gets some, weird off-platform buzz, like in the case of Geese or something like that, where there's maybe like kind of a broad sort of like curiosity about a certain band because there's just so many people talking about them and discussing them. Maybe another example being King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, that sort of thing, that there's just like a lot of curiosity and debate about what they do.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but at least in my mind, it creates maybe a little bit greater of an incentive to continue doing that and maybe come up with more creative ways of like trying to kind of introduce people into these worlds, because at least in my own experience, from what I can see, the algorithm in these platforms are making it more difficult to push people in these directions organically in a way where, gives them the opportunity to sort of stumble upon it accidentally,
Right.
and just sort of say, okay, I don't know what the hell this is. Let me just try it just because it popped up in front of my face.
Right. I mean, it
Yeah.
sucks. It sucks that it's like it's incentivizing more viral topics here, and like the algorithm itself is no longer this objective chronological feed, right? Everybody is getting this hyper personalized recommendations and stuff, and it feels crappy to think that you have to Trojan horse music in other in within more pop music topics here, much like I don't know how your Wrapped video would have performed if it was just like 5 ways that Spotify sucked this year, rather than like you're Wrapped, here's the thing that everyone's talking about, Wrapped, and then I'm
Right.
going to Trojan horse the sociopolitics of Spotify into this conversation. Like that was a
Right.
very clever way of doing that, but like you shouldn't have to be doing that every time you want to bring something up that's a little interesting to the left.
No, it's true. I'm talking with my editor about this stuff all the time, and like we found increasingly over the years that like you just said, like sometimes to get people to see something that we're saying, like we have to kind of like bait them into it,
Hmm.
with something like ridiculous or, something that is a little bit of a switch when you actually see the video content itself. And of course, like, it's related and everything, but, sometimes like when we're just doing it real straightforward and doing a video where maybe the title is like, I did the Velvet Underground liner notes, people maybe might not care so much, because it doesn't seem like as outlandish of a title.
A lot of what you're just saying really reminded me of this article that I taught this music writing class to undergraduates for the past 6 years. And for the beginning week of the class, I would always assign them this article from the New Yorker by Alex Ross from like 8 or 9 years ago, called The Fate of the Critic in the Clickbait Age, that sort of deals with a lot of what we've seen play out. Like this article is sort of like,
I'll look that up myself. I haven't read it myself.
yeah, like, I think from my perspective, it's one of the best articulations of what is at stake when the people who assign and edit criticism are sort of, viewing clicks as a metric by which they determine what is valuable. Because historically, there wouldn't necessarily be a way to tell, like, okay, someone might have picked up this newspaper for what's on the front page of it, but maybe they stuck around for the arts section and they read some of these shorter form reviews on this more experimental music, or maybe they read these jazz or classical reviews, which they wouldn't have picked up the paper for that, but because they were here, they got to them. And actually, we don't even have metrics on how many people read these reviews of this less popular music. But it does sort of like make me think, if there are ways of sort of recreating some of those dynamics just by, like, if you do a video review of one of the biggest pop records of the week, and then actually in that video, like at the end of it is, and if you like this record, here's 10 independent record releases from the past year that you might also like they're already clicked on it. They've already picked up the newspaper for what's on the front page, like give them some of
Right.
the back of the book stuff in the same video. Like, have you thought about doing anything like that?
There's probably like opportunities for people to do exactly that. I have been kind of talking with my, after I've been working with a new editor on a lot of my short form stuff, and I've been reconsidering like what our approach to like TikTok and Instagram are going to be in the next year, so that we can sort of like do some more recommendations on that front of stuff that isn't necessarily breaking out. We do also have the weekly track roundup that we do on the channel every week when, sort of like the music industry is coming out with more stuff on a regular basis. And usually we're able to use that as an opportunity to essentially say, like, put front and center the biggest singles and the biggest artists of that given week in terms of like, a single song drop. And then throughout the rest of the video, and the videos usually range from like 12 to 20 minutes, like recommend a bunch of other stuff as well, in terms of just sort of like, here's my worst tracks of the week. Here's the tracks I was kind of on the fence about. Here are my favorite tracks of the week. And again, that usually sort of like, and I stopped doing them around the end and the start of the year because things kind of slow down. And, it is always, at least a little bit heartening to kind of see some response of people being like, hey, is that weekly track roundup coming out? When's the weekly track roundup coming back? Also, New Music Friday usually provides a really good opportunity to kind of like have people live watching me and kind of like all together collectively listening to songs all the way through. kind of talking
Yeah.
about them and reacting a little bit, and letting everybody kind of have like a little bit of a say, because I allow the chat at the start of the show to kind of like decide what songs we end up kind of checking out, and kind of tell me off the top like what songs are the most excited to hear all together. And you've got like indie heads in there, and hip hop fans, and electronic music fans, and people who are just into different styles. And we're all kind of like, collectively listening to each other's favorites of the week. So it, creates a little bit of a cross breeding type of thing.
That's really beautiful. I mean, I always say the live streaming format is talk radio, talk radio for Zoomers and things like that. But that sounds like the
Oh yeah, for
combination of
sure.
a sounds like the combination of that plus just like a good old fashioned like listening club. I mean, it's at scale, obviously, but like the interactivity and the ability for some rando in the chat to recommend something to you that you even yourself haven't heard before. The potential for that it's goes beyond parasocial in the typical sense here. I mean, like there's real room for learning in those contexts. I think that's a really wonderful thing.
We're talking about 2025 and kind of like big conversations in music and media this year. And definitely something that I think has been really top of mind for many this year is sort of like not just AI, but the impacts that AI have had on critical thinking. And I've been thinking about AI, the impact on critical thinking as it relates to literacy. I'm wondering, like, as someone who makes videos, and also, even to us here making audio right now, like, do you worry about the issue of literacy at a time when so much of how we communicate and learn happens through audio and video, and as people who make audio and video, like, what can we be doing to encourage people to read?
Geez. Literacy and just broader media literacy, thinking about what your sources are. I mean, as well as I that like, major news and media outlets are like far from perfect. They're not bias free, but at least in what I guess we could frame as like the modern media landscape in maybe the early internet age, when you or I could be looking at the output, or the opinions, or the general coverage of a CNN, a Fox News, a Pitchfork, a New Yorker, whatever. Like, there's a process through which we could look at multiple articles or pieces of content from those outlets, and basically, and there are institutions that do this, like basically judge the bias of those outlets based upon past posts and takes and so on and so forth, and just, general coverage. And there was at least like a bit of familiarity, or like some I guess like way of accurately gauging the angle through which you were going to receive certain information based upon where you were finding it. These days, when people are sort of like asking Grok what it thinks about X or Y or Z. Sure, it is true that like, you could basically guarantee that that thing is going to tell you whatever Elon Musk wants you to think. But unfortunately, like, because Grok is not branded in the same way a news outlet is, a lot of people don't see it that way. Like, they see it as like this all-knowing, unbiased thing that's like, it's just going to give me the most honest information it can find because it's a robot. It doesn't have the bias that a human has. And I think, like, unfortunately, like, a lot of people just don't realize that, like, these things are coded to have bias. Like, it's not just an honest John robot that doesn't, have any sort of like slants in any direction. And also, I mean, like, at least from what we've seen in other, in recent iterations of Grok, can also be very easily swayed based upon what people are saying to it. To even say white supremacist talking points just based upon the stuff that people are replying to it with,
Right.
So, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like people are not only as you just kind of said there, like not reading deeper into certain topics because they're just kind of like taking without question whatever paragraph of information, quote unquote, that some AI chatbot hands them. But they're also not considering what the source of this information is. You know, I mean, more often than not, a lot of these chatbots are just like finding whatever comes to the top of a search engine. And these days, search engines are nearly unusable in a lot of cases because of the way that like AI is so pervasive and ads are so pervasive and biased information is so pervasive in terms of like what the top search results on any given topic are, especially if it's like a controversial or polarizing topic. It's something that you usually have to end up digging deeper on. I think everybody needs to start like questioning everything that they're seeing and where it's coming from. And I don't mean that in sort of like a conspiratorial way. Try to do your due diligence and be like, okay, what is this person saying? And what are they using to actually prove the truth of what the content it is? Are they actually verifying what they're saying? You know, what's the proof of it? What are the stats? What are the statistics? What are the hard truths? What are previous things that have been said by this person? Or what is the history of this topic that would lead things contextually to this point? Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are kind of stuck up Schitt's Creek with being and just being left to hang out to dry with not having a whole lot of readily available sources at their fingertips that they know that they can trust. And also kind of like, you know, especially in the realm of politics these days, speak to the plight that the average person is sort of like dealing with on a daily basis, as far as like the economic state of this country, and a host of other things too. I feel like a lot of these people don't really trust these outlets off the bat because these outlets are not addressing their everyday realities of the difficulties that they're dealing with and what they're suffering through, and you know, are easily swayed or persuaded over by anybody who, even if it's, you know, a lie that they're being ultimately told in terms of like what the source of their problems in everyday life are, you know, they'll easily be swayed by somebody who's at least addressing the fact that they have a problem, you know?
Right.
Of course,
Right.
there's then a subversion and then saying, well, you know, I see that you're having an issue. Here's the source of it. Here's the reason it's happening. Of course, that's kind of the bait and switch. That's the lie.
Yeah.
But, you know, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of politicians and our media outlets are kind of like missing out on an opportunity to actually inform people by ignoring the fact that economically speaking, politically speaking, there's some real wildfires going on now that are not being put out. And you know, it's creating a vacuum for people to be kind of propagandized and persuaded who know something is going on that is wrong, but they just don't have the education or the ability to do the research themselves to sort of like understand the broader issues and understand the causes and understand the problems.
Yeah, well, all the more reason to do what we can to, you know,
Yeah.
champion outlets that are worth people's time.
We need a Joe Rogan of the left, you know?
Or I'm thinking like, you know, reminding people that like democracy now exists.
Yeah,
Democracy
for
Now
real.
exists.
Shout outs to yeah.
Jacobin exists. I just did a thing on their show about AI music and that sort of thing. There are great YouTube channels that I watch on a regular basis, like the Majority Report. Shout out to them. They do a lot of very easy to follow and entertaining news coverage. There are a lot of, you know, worthwhile outlets out there in the news space. And, you know, again, most definitely Democracy Now is one of many.
Yeah. Shout outs to Amy Goodman.
But yeah.
I think that's it. Unless there's any other like reading or book recommendations that you have for our listeners.
You know, I'm on the last few chapters of Kim Gordon's memoir right now, and that was kind of fun. You know, it's kind of a fun one. If you want to get an understanding of like the '90s rock scene, but also, you know, there's some pretty choice pages in there that really just like kind of tell of the economics of underground music at the time as well, and sort of like, you know, the place that people found themselves in if they, you know, saw if they decided to sort of seek out the you know, the underground artist's life. And while, you know, obviously like it wasn't lavish, you know, it seemed like a lot more affordable than what people are kind of being faced with right now in terms of like, you know, cost of living and so on and so forth. Like, again, you weren't living high off the hog if you decided that you were going to kind of like slug it out in New York and, really try to make it as an independent musician. But if it's something you really wanted to go for, you had the opportunity to, and the job market wasn't so fucked that if you decided to give it up entirely and just move on with your life and do something else, like you weren't losing out on an opportunity of actually becoming a 9 to 5 type of adult. These days, it's sort of with what I'm seeing about like ghost jobs and internships and so on and so forth, it sort of seems like you need to be preparing for the job market by the time you're in 8th grade. And if you're not like making every correct and perfect step that you possibly can, like you're basically fucked by the time you're in your mid-20s, which is crazy. You're depriving people of so many opportunities to try out different things and experiment and sort of see what like really works for them. But that's another discussion probably.
I know. I feel like this one truly could go on for several more hours.
I
So
know.
thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks again for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to go finish my worst song of the year
Thank you,
list.
Anthony. Do it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Critical Listening Podcast. The show is created and written by Liz Pelly and myself, Max Alper. And our associate producer and audio engineer is Nick Zanka. You can support the show by joining the Patreon at patreon.com/criticallistening, where you'll have early access to episodes before they hit the public platforms, as well as our Discord community. And our theme song is the track Talk to Me by the band Eraser.